So whilst we are setting up, I can introduce myself. My name is Malachy O'Connor. I'm the IPLC partner representing the Irish territory, North and South. Today, I have the pleasure of giving you a very quick introduction to the Irish, but also the UK market. My colleague Richard Harrow can't be with you today, so I'm going to present on both Ireland and UK. There are many, many similarities between the Irish and UK markets. Hopefully there'll be time at the end for some questions, and we'll just get the presentation up and running now. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So for every section in today's presentation, I'm going to give you a slide on Ireland and a slide on UK, and we can compare and contrast. What we're going to do is look at the context, the market context, how the market has evolved over the last 20, 30 years, items such as the role of the discounters, and then how private label has evolved in the last few years. At the end of the presentation, we'll look at the outlook for private label in the market, and we'll look at specific opportunities for private label suppliers. So that's a flavour for the presentation today. So firstly, for Ireland, it's a small market, less than 5 million population. We're a happy member of the EU, and we intend to stay with the EU. As opposed to our good neighbours in the UK, who are a much bigger market, 14 times the size of Ireland in population, almost 70 million, and an unhappy member of the EU and just about to leave. So just to get specifically into retail, in Ireland we have a lot of the UK brands and also some international brands represented in our supermarkets. 90% of the Irish market, the grocery market, is tied up in 5 retailers. The top retailer being an indigenous retailer called Dunnes Stores, a family retailer. Number 2 is Tesco, the UK and global retailer. Number 3 is another indigenous supermarket, SuperValu, who operate a chain of owner-operated, medium-sized supermarkets. Very interestingly, Aldi and Lidl, our 2 discounters who entered the market 20 years ago, now have market share approaching 25% by value. And the other 10% of the market is taken up by convenience stores, chains, Marks and Spencer's, Iceland, high street discounters, etc., etc. The UK market is slightly less concentrated in that there are 8 retailers that command the same 90% of the market. And Tesco are by far the biggest retailer in the UK market, commanding over 27% of grocery market share. That's an interesting number because before the discounters took really good traction in Ireland, Tesco's market share was at about 27 or 28%. And a running theme through my presentation and my talks is that the Irish market is a really useful market to look at if you would like to have a crystal ball to see what might happen in the UK. Just to take it a bit further then, so what does it mean for a private label supplier who's thinking about opportunities in these markets? How many points of distribution could you hit if you achieved a contract with one of these retailers? Well, Ireland's a much smaller market, so our 90% of the market share in those 5 retailers is tied up in less than 800 stores. In the UK, the same 90% share with 8 retailers is tied up in over 11,000 stores. So it's a much bigger market. And if you win a contract with one of those UK-based retailers, you're talking about many more distribution points. So moving on then just to how the market has evolved in the last 20 or 30 years, there's 3 elements that I would say are important to take note of in both markets. First of all, it's the arrival of the discounters, Aldi and Lidl, and how they shook up the market. The second thing is how the market responded to that arrival of the discounters. And then the final element is an underlying current of volatility that is impacting everybody's business. And there are 3 things I'm going to talk about quickly now. So firstly, I would say that the discounters have raised the bar in each of these markets. It was a false start, though. When the discounters entered the UK market, there was slow adoption of their offer, mainly because their offer wasn't good. They opened not very good stores in not very good areas, selling not very good products, and they learned from that experience. So when they entered the Irish market nearly 10 years later, they had learned from all of their mistakes. And they came to Ireland with no baggage. They came with almost 100% private label range. They had addressed all of their quality issues, so it was a premium quality product at a very low price. They had also started to take note of provenance issues. So if you're going to enter a market like Ireland, you need to make sure you're sourcing the key products that need to be Irish. They took account of where customers had fears, such as traceability and supply chain integrity on categories like fresh meat, and they made sure that those categories became their hero categories, so that customers could go on an accelerated journey of trust with a new retailer. And they started to win awards, food awards, and develop their PR awareness, and they developed very, very significant marketing budgets. So it was a very, very different approach to discounting in Ireland, thanks to the lessons that the discounters had learned in the UK. And around 2012, many of the things that had been trialled in Ireland began to be adopted in the UK market. But this was very successful for the discounters, and the market was always going to have to respond to this. And they did this in around the end of 2014. It was led by Tesco, and they dropped the prices on about 1,500 of their private label products, the highest volume private label products. And they simplified the range. They knew that if a shopper was to successfully switch back from a discounter to a multiple, it had to be a simpler shopping experience. So they took 15% of the range off the shelves and gave that space to private label products. Give it some space and looked like they were proud of their private label ranges. Dropping prices was a very effective way to get good visibility of the products that customers wanted, because most often if you drop the price, customers will buy more of it. And very quickly, companies like Tesco got good visibility of the core range of products, the products that most consumers buy most weeks. And that turned out to be nothing more than about 400 products. And when you drop the price on these high volume items, it costs a lot of money, and it has a massive impact on your margin mix for a retailer. And what that did was that set up all of the following developments in private label, particularly the development of premium private label, which was sold at a 2 or 3 times premium, with margins that were perhaps double the standard tier. And even if it was smaller volume, it was much more profitable and had a profound impact on the category mix, margin mix. Some additional trends. So retailers got addicted and customers got addicted to vouchering. One of the indigenous retailers, Dunnes Stores, introduced a €10 back for every €50 spent. And they've been doing that since the start of 2015. And for 1 week, they stepped away from it, and they very quickly stepped back to it. That's how addicted their customers are. And what that does, it makes customers a little bit playful, a bit giddy. It makes them more likely to spend money on brands, but also on premium private label. And that's been the trend for Dunnes Stores. And the multiples also made a massive effort to differentiate their offer versus the discounters in store, through fresh food offers particularly, but also through service offers. And they tried to flex their online advantage, because it's not something the discounters do as yet. But over the period from 2014, when this price war started, to 2019 now, the basket of core groceries has dropped in price by about 15%. And that's a significant impact. The underlying volatility that we mentioned is all about commodities and currency and politics, really. The commodity prices, the world commodity prices like vegetable oils, like wheat, cocoa, proteins, they've peaked and crashed twice in the last 10 years. And that's had an enormous impact on private label suppliers and private label retailers. Currency has been very, very volatile through that same period, impacted by political goings-on around Brexit, etc. And this has meant that for many, many private label retailers, their margins have been getting tighter, and this has created downward cost pressure on the private label suppliers. And it's a very, very tough market to trade in. The long-term impact of all of this, if you look back over nearly 20 years in Ireland, is that the mainstream multiples actually held their ground, and the discounters went about their business very slowly off the radar. And then they reached a point where there were sufficient stores to create a critical mass, but also that organizations like Nielsen and Kantar improved their measurement methods. And it appears that the discounters took a jump. And some of that is real. It also appears that the multiples fell off a cliff. And that was the point at which this price investment happened at the end of 2014. And as a result of that, there's been pretty much a stalemate from then until now. And it's only in the last few months that Aldi has managed to break away from Lidl, and that Dunnes Stores has managed to break away from Tesco and Super Value. This is really interesting when I show you the UK graph, because over the same time period, you can see exactly the same trend. You can see discounters slowly under the radar coming up in importance in market share, and the mainstream multiples slowly losing market share to them. Now, if you think about what Aldi have said openly, they've got less than 900 stores in the UK now, but their ambition is to get to 1,200 stores by 2025. So is that kind of the store numbers that might create a similar tipping point in the UK market? I certainly believe that it might be, and that's something for you to bear in mind if you're looking to develop business in the UK and Ireland. So if the big thing has been the growth of the discounters, and the discounters are 85, 90, 95% private label, then you can see the impact that will have had on private label penetration. And over the last 4 or 5 years, you can see that in Ireland and UK, private label has moved from 47-48% of sales up to 50-51% of sales, a really significant growth. And it tracks exactly the increase in market share that the discounters have been taking. Now, what I think is really interesting is that market share is very often based on value, unless you specifically say volume. Those numbers are value volume share. And if private label is 50% by value, then it could be 55 or 60% by volume, because necessarily the private label items have a lower average selling price. And now you start to see how important private label is in a really big market like the UK. So what's the outlook then for these markets? And we could discuss this in many different ways. There's one particular insight that I'd like to share with you that I think suggests the outlook. And that is the population, the heads of... There are 5,000 Germans for every discounter store in Germany. 5,000 population for every shop. In Ireland, there's 15,000 of us for every discounter. And in the UK, there are 25,000 population for every discounter store of whatever brand. So it clearly illustrates the scope for development of the discounter estate. And it begins to make Aldi's target of 1,200 stores look maybe conservative. So that's something to be borne in mind. So I think we can see the direction of travel is going to be in the favor of discounters, but also private label necessarily. But what does that mean in product terms? I think there's 4 major food trends that are going to describe the kinds of products that are developed in private label. And those are convenience, health, sustainability, and exploration. And I'll give you a quick rundown of what those mean, what I think they mean. On health, it's everything from gut health to healthy aging for older consumers. It could be about calorie control and portion control. More recently, it's into the role of hemp and CBD oils, mental health, fitness foods, interesting diet philosophies. Health means many, many different things. It's not just free from or low calorie. And there are many, many good examples in the UK and Irish markets. Tesco are going with a program called Healthy Little Swaps. And they're using the brands to pay for the point of sale in the stores, but the campaign extends into the private label world where they're saying, you could buy this, but actually this is a little bit healthier. Aldi, for example, they see no bounds in terms of where they can take their private label. They've developed a private label version of a popular branded product, the Spray Light, the 1-calorie spray oil. Tesco have a fantastic reputation for free from. Interesting to see Lidl developing their range and their reputation in that same area. And Tesco in Ireland have just launched a range of naturally low-calorie and low-fat protein products under the Good Choice label. Both Lidl and Asda in the last number of weeks have gone publicly on the record to say that they're going to change the designs of their breakfast cereals to remove all of the cartoon characters and create less, they call it pester power, where the kids put pressure on their parents to buy these products. So they're taking a principled step to say, we're going to try and make your trolley a little bit healthier. Sustainability is a massive trend, one of the big 4 that I think today, and it means so many different things. It means reduction of food waste, it means everything around packaging, renewable, recyclable, reusable, etc. It means supply chains that are transparent and have integrity. It also means ethical business and fair play for primary producers. Reducing carbon footprint, increased animal welfare, and the growth of veganism and flexitarianism. Again, many good examples. Tesco continuing to push their eco-household range. Aldi taking their first steps actually with branded recycled plastic Tupperware items. But you know that if it works in the brand, then they'll very quickly translate it into private label. Lidl have launched a high ethics chocolate bar. And Iceland in the UK have said that they will be plastic free by 2023. And they've gone on the record and said it. And if the retailers aren't taking these steps, consumers are actually taking their own steps anyway. What I find very interesting, after Christmas, we go out and we visit stores, and Tesco had a good Christmas. When I go into their stores, there was very little seasonal stock left over, so they had a clean exit from Christmas, which is good as a retailer. What was left behind was lots of wrapping paper and Christmas crackers. And I think consumers effectively rejected that and said, that's unnecessary packaging, we don't want that. So that was a really interesting trend. And then some of my sources have said that things like food wraps and food films, the sales have dropped by 10% in the last year. So they're still on sale, but customers are voting with their wallets. There are some surprising contradictions though, because in the Irish market, sales of bottled water grew by 6% in the last year, and that doesn't make sense to me. And for all of the noise and the PR around veganism, sales of fresh beef only fell by 2% in the last year. So I think that's very interesting, what businesses say and do and what consumers say and do. The third element is around exploration, the third consumer trend, and this is around emerging flavors, emerging drinks and drink trends. This is where premium private label fits in, and how it crosses over with artisan products and a demand for micro-provenance. It's not just good enough to know where the product came from in terms of its nationality, but customers need to know what field it came from these days. Some really great examples in Ireland. Aldi have been very active. They've developed an X factor for small suppliers called Grow with Aldi, where they've developed small artisan suppliers. And they're very ambitious about the artisan products they can launch within private label, because that award-winning Boyle's gin is actually a private label line. The last of those consumer trends that frame private label innovation is convenience. And it's not just about ready meals, it's about meal components and food to go and meal kits. But more importantly, it's becoming about how do you order and receive delivery of that food. And in store, how do you merchandise the products that you need so that they're close together and easy to shop? And that's where things are going. But instead of giving you some examples of that, what I'd like to do is kind of finish off my presentation by saying that really, when convenience and those four big trends converge, that's when you get something that's hot. That's when you get something that's really interesting. And what I'd like to demonstrate to you is that there's a product range that Tesco have launched about a year, 18 months ago, called the Wicked Kitchen. And this is a really good example of convergence of trends. These are products that are convenient. They save you time because they're microwavable ready meals. They're also healthy because they're calorie controlled. They're also sustainable. They're organic and meat-free. They taste good, so they represent a sense of exploration. They have interesting flavors inspired by the world. And there's also an authenticity because the owners of that company are making, in specific partnership with Tesco now. And when all of those things converge, then you're onto a winner. And that's where I think your innovation efforts should be as a private label operator in this market. So that's my presentation. Thank you for your attention. If you have any questions on the two markets, I'll be happy to field them now. Thank you.
Any question?
Yes. I have one question. I think the Brexit. What do you, from your point of view, you think is going to happen? Are the retailers going to concentrate more on their local suppliers, or they will still consider like importing from mainland Europe? Is it going to have an impact, you think? Especially I'm thinking about the discounters who are also importing a lot of things from outside of UK, even though is that something you see also a discounter trying to relocalize the production?
Remy, it's the interesting question. I think the discounters, as we know, are very good with their supply chain. It's one of their key points of difference is how they deliver that efficiency and keep their costs down. I think they viewed Brexit as an opportunity to improve their supply chains even further. So they were first out of the blocks maybe 2 years ago developing supply chains that meant that products could come from continental Europe directly into Ireland without going across the land bridge of the UK. And they managed to find cost savings actually in that. And you can see even at a product level, you can see how the pallet lines that they have in store, the high volume lines that just get wheeled out of the warehouse and straight onto the floor on a pallet. Even those pallets, they found efficiencies in how those pallets can be arranged so that they can fit more products on the loads. So I think they've seen Brexit as an opportunity to even assert their competitive edge on supply chain management. The interesting thing about the UK-based retailers is that they would like to to say that they buy British, and they do buy a lot of British, but the British private label supply industry does not have capacity to supply them. It doesn't have full capacity to supply them. So if any retailer came out and said we'll only buy British, they couldn't. So the market is nearly 70 million and will continue to need to import products private label.
And in which categories do you see more like retailers sourcing from abroad? Like, is it more into convenient, fresh, non-food, near food? From your point of view,
I think practically the products with the shortest shelf life will always be sourced in the most localized fashion, and products where there's a point of difference or where there's a particular efficiency in a particular region or a particular taste in a particular region, then they'll be sourced from outside the territory.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Remy.
We see that Irish manufacturers export a lot. They're fantastic. They're very present, very active in the European continent, exporting both branded and private label goods. Whereas UK manufacturers seem to be almost absent in the export market of private label food. Do you have a reason why this could be the case?
There's probably two parts to that, Cohen, which is that if you have a big market on your doorstep, then you'll use it. And that you won't feel necessarily the pressure to export beyond your borders. And this probably goes for Dutch producers and Portuguese producers who are in smaller countries, Belgian producers. So that's the first thing. The other thing is that Ireland has a natural advantage in some areas. So it's always raining, the grass grows, our cows eat the grass, then they make really good beef and really good dairy. So that's the spine of our export industries, that beef and dairy and drinks also. So we have a natural advantage in those areas, but also an ambition which is common to all small nations, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Nope. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.